Mr. Slivyak, over to you.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Kaiser, dear Mr. Brook, dear members of the Management Board and the Supervisory Board, dear shareholders. My name is Vladimir Slivyak. I work for a Russian non-governmental organization, Ecodefense, which has been campaigning for safe energy and climate protection for over 30 years. Because of this work, my organization was falsely accused and persecuted by Russian government. In 2022, European Court on Human Rights ruled that Russian government violated our rights. And still, I had to leave Russia along with my colleagues because it became impossible for us to continue environmental and climate defending work. As long as the Russian President Putin is in power, we can't go back to our home country because it would lead us to prison. I'm shocked by the barbaric Russian war in Ukraine and other crimes conducted by the Russian political elite, like the recent killing of Alexei Navalny. You, Mr. Kaiser, said in your speech that ongoing war has shown how wrong our assessment of the situation has been for years, even decades. You further mentioned that the war in Ukraine is a wake-up call for all of us. This is partly true. After Russia started full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022, many European companies left Russia. I was glad when Siemens Energy announced that it's ending its business in Russia, because continuing business there means continuing financial and political support for Vladimir Putin and his insane war in Ukraine. But obviously, the wake-up call was not loud enough for Siemens Energy. You are still involved in the construction of the Paks 2 nuclear power plant in Hungary, which is implemented by the Russian nuclear giant Rosatom and financed from a Russian state budget. In fact, this is the only Russian state-funded project on the EU territory, and the Siemens Energy plans to supply instrumentation and control systems for Paks 2 project. You told me last year that you want to honor existing contracts. Why do you want to honor a contract with a corporation that serves as a geopolitical tool of a terror regime? Rosatom is a state nuclear corporation serving as a part of government and reporting directly to President Vladimir Putin. It is involved in the war in Ukraine directly and indirectly. Rosatom was assisting the Russian army in the war by sending its staff to help occupy the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. It has also offered to procure key goods needed by the Russian army to produce tanks and aircrafts, potentially bypassing existing sanctions. Finally, Rosatom is the producer of Russian nuclear weapons, which the Putin regime regularly threatens to use against Western countries. But you still want to honor this dishonorable contract? The Rosatom Supervisory Board includes senior governmental officials sanctioned in numerous countries for their involvement in the war against Ukraine. For example, its Deputy Chief of Presidential Administration, Sergei Kiriyenko, who is responsible for internal politics in Russia, for presidential election, for the integration of the occupied Ukrainian territories. Another board member in Rosatom is a Deputy Prime Minister, Yuri Trutnev. Another board member of Rosatom is a Deputy Director of a Russian Secret Service, FSB, Sergei Krylov. Just a few days ago, a new investigation by independent reporters revealed that Rosatom board members Kiriyenko and Trutnev organized a Rosatom-sponsored fighting squad for the war in Ukraine. But you still want to honor this existing dishonorable contract. In recent years, the Hungarian government has successfully prevented more far-reaching EU sanctions and measures against the Russian regime in a few cases. The reason for Hungarian action is obvious, because this country is already heavily dependent on Russian energy supplies. And the Siemens Energy wants to continue, despite the brutal wake-up call, as a willing henchman to further increase this dependency through PACS 2. Mr. Kaiser, Mr. Brok, you have the power to take an important geopolitical instrument out of Russian hands. Show that you have really understood the wake-up call. There is more than enough of evidence about the danger and brutality of a Russian regime in its close ties with Rosatom. I urge you to immediately stop the dealing with Rosatom, whether directly or in cooperation with Framatome. Cooperation with war criminals cannot be part of an honorable business. I call on Siemens Energy to pull out from a Rosatom-led project of PACS 2 nuclear power plant. I would also like to ask following questions. Number one, does Siemens Energy still apply for the necessary permission from the German government to export the instrumentation and control systems for 2 reactors at the PACS 2? If so, what is current status of this application? When is Siemens Energy planning to deliver it to Hungary? Number two, does Siemens Energy have existing contracts to supply parts for new nuclear reactors being built by Russian Rosatom? Number three, does Siemens Energy have existing contracts with Rosatom for the modernization and maintenance of nuclear reactors in Russia? Number four, does Siemens Energy directly or indirectly, through French Framatome, supply any parts for any projects of Rosatom VVER 1200 reactors? If so, for which projects? Number five, for which projects with Russian-designed reactors did Siemens Energy supply any parts in the past? And number six, is there any involvement by Siemens Energy in the Rosatom-led projects in Turkey at the Akuyu nuclear power plant, in Bangladesh, Rupur nuclear power plant, or Egypt, El Dabaa nuclear power plant? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.
Ja, herzlichen Dank, Herr Slivyak.
Thank you, Mr. Slivyak. Now we finished our second block or group of speakers on our list of speakers. I think we are still on schedule, more or less, since the last few colleagues, Mr. Bolder, Mr. Behnert, didn't use up the full 10 minutes. I would suggest that we should now start the third group of speakers immediately.
In Übereinstimmung mit meinem Vorredner, Herrn Nissen von der Deutschen Umwelthilfe, muss ich leider feststellen, der fossile Trend setzt sich bei Siemens Energy fort. Im Geschäftsbericht wird von weiteren Auftragseingängen für Gaskraftwerke, zum Beispiel in den USA und Brasilien, berichtet. Zudem belegen Presseberichte und Informationen öffentlicher Banken, dass Siemens Energy sich an Gaskraftwerken in Usbekistan und in Vietnam beteiligen will. Traditionell sucht Siemens Energy für solche Geschäfte eine Absicherung durch sogenannte Hermes-Deckungen, also Exportkreditgarantien der Bundesregierung. Doch seit November vergangenen Jahres erlauben die klimapolitischen Sektorleitlinien solche Bürgschaften für neue Gaskraftwerke nur noch unter sehr hohen Auflagen. Darunter niedrige Treibhausgasemissionen über den gesamten Lebenszyklus oder die Möglichkeit einer 50-prozentigen Umstellung der Kraftwerke auf Wasserstoff. Es ist also mit Bezug auf die Sektorleitlinien sehr fraglich, ob Siemens Energy diese Voraussetzungen erfüllt. Zudem ist das Kapitel Kohle immer noch nicht abgeschlossen. Siemens Energy beteiligt sich zwar seit November 2020 nicht mehr an Ausschreibungen für neue Kohlekraftwerke. Damals bereits unterbreitete Angebote werden jedoch immer noch bedient, zum Beispiel beim Bau der Kohlekraftwerke Java 9 und 10 in Indonesien. Auch Service- und Lösungsgeschäfte für existierende Kohlekraftwerke laufen weiter. Außerdem Projekte mit effizienter Kraft-Wärme-Kopplung. Das ist aus unserer Sicht unverantwortlich. Meine Fragen an den Vorstand lauten deswegen: Wie viele und welche Erdgaskraftwerke und LNG-Projekte haben 2023 staatliche Bürgschaften bekommen? Auf welche Gesamtsumme summieren sich die Bürgschaften und welchen Anteil davon machen Exportkreditgarantien aus? Welcher Anteil davon entfällt einerseits auf Euler Hermes welcher andererseits auf andere Exportkreditagenturen? Und welche weiteren staatlichen Förderungsinstrumente auf Bundes- oder Landesebene wurden für Erdgaskraftwerke und LNG-Projekte der Siemens Energy in Anspruch genommen? Welche Gasprojekte haben in welchem Umfang davon profitiert? Außerdem rechnet Siemens Energy mit dem Verlust von Bürgschaften bzw. Krediten aufgrund der neuen Klimasektorleitlinien für Exportkreditgarantien, die ich eben erwähnt habe, oder aufgrund der neuen KfW-Sektorleitlinien zu Öl und Gas. Plant Siemens Energy den Export von Gasturbinen bzw. Gaskraftwerken für sogenannte Coal-to-Gas-Shifts auch unabhängig vom Kriterium der H2-Readiness? Teilt Siemens Energy die Einschätzung, dass dafür keine Bürgschaften in Deutschland mehr beantragt werden können, da nur diejenigen Gasturbinen und Kraftwerke gefördert werden, die nachweislich 50% H2-Ready sind und nur diejenigen Unternehmen, die laut SBTI, also Science-Based Target Initiative, 1,5 Grad kompatible Sektor 1, 2 und 3 Emissionsziele haben? Außerdem, welche Risiken sieht Siemens Energy in Bezug auf Stranded Assets durch die steigende Erderwärmung und/oder durch sinkende Gasverbrauchsprognosen? Außerdem, welche Risiken sieht Siemens Energy durch die Ankündigung der USA vom Ende Januar diesen Jahres keine neuen LNG-Genehmigungen zu erteilen? Rechnet Siemens Energy mit einem möglichen Ausfall geplanter Projekte in dem Zusammenhang? Was ist der gesamte finanzielle Umfang der weiterlaufenden kohlebezogenen Projekte? Und daran anschließend, wann wird Siemens Energy endlich das Kapitel Kohle ein für alle Mal schließen? Ja, das waren meine Fragen und vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Vielen Dank, Herr Leiner.